Hi everyone, welcome to Relatively Credible. This week, Spencer and I are going to look at top 10 tips for going to Disney World in 2022. Maybe if this is your first time coming, or maybe you've not been for a while, but we think these will be 10 useful tips and we're going to take it in turns here. Do you want to kick us off with your first one? I'm interested to hear yours.
Many people, I scour the internet and watch a lot of people talking about Disney. And I think this makes the most sense. It's a little bit easier for us folks that live in Florida to do this, or it's not as big of an expense to come to Disney when you do live close by. But the first thing that I would write down as a tip is make sure that you try to pay for everything before you go. So try to have your room and board booked up. Try to have your food paid off. However, if we do have the Disney dining plan back. Or if you're just trying to have some money set aside for just food, but try to have everything paid off. There's a lot of changes that are happening, so this is a good way to prepare for that, but also it's just going to make your trip that much better. If you can just have a little bit of cash tucked aside for all of the expenses that are going to come up. There's a lot of things like the Magical Express you're probably going to have to pay for nowadays. There's a lot of extra fees, and if you can get ahead of that, it's just going to make your trip that much more enjoyable.
I totally agree with this one. Also, the food has recently gone up as well. There's been some adjustments for inflation and supply chain. But I remember when I first came, we came when we were kids here, but when I first came when we were still in the UK, I remember one of the first times we came, I hadn't budgeted enough. I wasn't expecting it to be quite as expensive it was. And you do need to have a little bit of a buffer so that you don't have to worry about cash, because there's nothing worse than being in Disney World and being on a limited budget. I've definitely been there.
It's just going to make your trip that much more enjoyable. If you do have everything paid off, it's going to allow you a little bit more freedom to do things as well.
Well, my first one is if time allows, I would highly encourage you, if you've not done it before, to take a trip around some of the resorts. There are some beautiful resorts on Disney World. The Polynesian is really easy to get to. Same with the Grand Floridian. Yep. Just beautiful. Wilderness Lodge is like being somewhere completely different than Florida. There's some really cool resorts. Take the boat, take the buses, take the monorail. It's a great, relaxing thing to do and gets you out of the hustle and bustle. And plus, you get to see some great resort hotels, I think.
Yeah, some of the resorts are great. I have heard, I have not experienced this, but I have heard that you do have to make sure that you have a reservation ahead of time. So if you're going to go to these places, you may need to have either you're staying there, but also if you could book some of the great dining locations that are, especially like the Grand Floridian. I think they have some great food there. If you could book a reservation there, they will allow you in, but they have kind of cracked down a bit on going, hopping resort to resort, here in 2022. My next tip, if you're coming, is really to help you plan when you're going to be coming. Right now, we've seen kind of unprecedented busy times in January and February so far, but it's really to do a lot of your homework and check your crowd calendars. A lot of folks know this already, especially if you guys are big Disney fans, but there's crowd calendars all over the internet that allow you to see when the busy times are on the previous year, especially. But definitely check those when you're planning on actually visiting Disney World and what parks you're going to be visiting Disney World. There's a ton of them out there that even tell you the breakdown from park to park and how busy it is. So I definitely would suggest that your next trip should be the first thing you do when you're planning the dates you're going to come to is check those crowd calendars. Most of them are absolutely free.
This year has been totally bizarre, hasn't it? Because January is usually one of the down periods, but yet the parks have been busier than ever. I mean, we were at Hollywood Studios a few weeks ago, weren't we? And it was really busy.
It felt like a peak hour, honestly.
My next one, and this one, when I first visited Disney, I would never have done myself, but now I do it all the time, and that is take a small backpack with you, because you can put stuff in it, of course. I take a bottle of water, but I just take a plastic bottle of water with me. I don't take a canteen with me because if you take a canteen with you, more than likely your bag's going to get searched. But I highly encourage you to take a raincoat, Because when it rains in Florida, if you're not used to the rain, it really, really rains. And you don't want to be caught paying $12 for a poncho. Bring your favourite light raincoat. You'll be a lot more comfortable in it. And there's certain parks, I don't know what you think about this, Spencer, especially Epcot, which is my favourite park. There is very little shelter to actually get out of the rain. I think, which park would you say is probably the best to get rained in on, if there is one?
I don't know if any of them are really good. Maybe Disney Springs too. That's a good one. If hopefully you're at Disney Springs, because there's a lot of covering there.
Yeah, and I'll add a little extra one into this.
Yeah.
Also make sure that you're wearing sensible shoes that can get wet and you can wear them wet. Because if it rains, I have an ugly pair of Skechers. They're very, very comfortable. They're made of a material that if they get wet, it dries quickly, or you're certainly not squelching around in it. I think footwear, you're going to be doing a lot of walking, and the footwear can make or break the day, I think.
100%. So for me, I think this is a super controversial one. This one might get me in trouble if Disney execs are listening here, but I would say consider staying off property. So if this is your first time coming, I would highly recommend this, especially if you're coming with like maybe multiple families or just a big family. I love all of the Disney resorts. They're all great, and they all have really nice shiny spots. However, they are very expensive. I'm in a couple of forums where we're actively talking about this. They're very expensive, and right now, the way it stands today, you don't get a lot of benefits for staying on the resorts, especially now that Magical Express is gone and things like that. And I'll tell you this, I tell a lot of people when they're booking their Disney World trip to consider the great local Airbnbs around the side. There's a ton of them out there. A lot of people are pricing them really affordably. You get a much bigger space. It's only $25 a day right now for parking, standard parking. So you usually... typically you can factor that in, and you can still save a ton of money by Airbnbs. And honestly, some of the Airbnbs that I stayed at when I was coming into town would only be about a 10-minute drive into the parks. I guess you do lose some of the immersion, but if you don't really care about that immersion, you can save an awful lot of money staying at a local Airbnb.
I've done it both ways. So I've stayed in local hotels on International Drive, which is an experience in itself. I stayed at Wilderness Lodge, which was gorgeous. And I've also stayed at the Caribbean Beach Club, which is very similar to some of the local hotels, kind of motel-type rooms. And you're just paying extra for the fact that it's on the Skyliner and you're in that Disney bubble, which definitely has its advantages being in that Disney bubble because you're in the magic, so to speak. But it can have disadvantages if you're wanting to get out. We came from the UK once. We didn't hire a car. We thought we would use the Disney transport. It's very hard to get to Universal unless you Uber or something like that. So you're in the Disney bubble, and there's a number of logical steps to get out of the Disney bubble. So I would say certainly that the hotels have got a premium now, for sure.
Yeah, and I'd say you can really do a lot with the car. People underestimate how great Orlando is and all of the great food and all the great scenery and all the things you can do. There's a lot of benefits to driving in or landing and renting a vehicle. And honestly, with the price difference, it could kind of be a wash if you're getting an Airbnb and you still have a rental car. It's something I would definitely consider.
And a tip for the rental cars is Orlando rental car scene is an anomaly over everywhere else that you go in the US, where the minivans are in short supply, not the other cars.
Yeah.
Normally, if a rental company around the US is short of cars, they usually offer you a minivan, don't they? Whereas in Orlando, it's the minivans are in very short supply. So you plan around that, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. All right, you're up.
This is one that I think is really key at the moment, and we've certainly fallen foul of this one. If you are in the parks and you see a souvenir, you see some Disney merch, you see a mug, you see something that you want, buy it, and buy it there, and buy it straight away. Because a lot of the merchandise now is not only park exclusive, but it's selling out extremely fast. We've gone Certainly when the original Epcot merchandise came out, we were trying to find certain pieces, the light up Mickey ears and things like that for my wife. If you procrastinate, the next time you go, it'll be gone. There's a whole lot of new stuff in there. There's a lot of people buying stuff to flip it on eBay as well, and Disney are trying to crack down on that, but it's really constraining supply. So if you see something you want, buy it. But also bear in mind that Disney isn't doing the ship to room service anymore. They will post things back to your home location within the US, I think, but maybe factor in a locker or have somebody that's responsible for having the bags because stuff is selling out quick.
Absolutely. I actually knew somebody who got so desperate for because they were buying so many souvenirs that they rented a wheelchair.
Oh,
and then
really?
They would just maybe this isn't good to tell, but they would just rent a wheelchair just to carry around their souvenirs that they were buying.
What's your next one then?
Be ready to adjust for changes is my fourth one. So at any time, it seems like in this season, there could be adjustments made. Obviously, there's some controversy that's happening right now around masks and the conversation around masks still. So there could be any changes. Walt Disney's Disney World is very interesting on how it makes decisions and how they've partnered with Florida. Don't need to get into anything too controversial here, but they can shift pretty quickly. And so I would say just be ready to make adjustments as needed. We obviously saw Genie Plus was one of the things when I was thinking about this that came to mind. You might decide to utilize it or to not utilize it, depending on what crowds look like, how you felt maybe the first day when you went to the parks. Maybe the second day you could make a decision on if you're going to buy it or not. I would say just be ready to make adjustments, and it'll actually kind of correspond with my fifth item here as well. They kind of relate, but I'll want to hear from your perspective. What do you think about being ready to adjust? Was there anything recent where you've had to, quickly make an adjustment on your trip?
Yes, I definitely would say so. Especially with the park reservation system, always have a second option in mind because it is possible, especially with Magic Kingdom. Usually Magic Kingdom sells out first, then Hollywood Studios, then Animal Kingdom, and usually you can get into Epcot. So factor that in, that if you can get into Epcot, you can go to another park after 2 p.m. So factor that in, but yes, you're right. There's things that are changing all the time. Like, for example, the Skyliner was down the other week for, I think, a couple of days. So if you're staying at one of those Skyliner resorts, you paid the extra. Also factor in that the Skyliner might not be working.
You have to plan on if you're going to get Remy's or if you're going to get Rise of Resistance, some of the virtual queues, some of the restaurant options. You have to be ready to make adjustments, and you can't be too upset if not everything goes your way. You just got to be kind of prepared for that.
Plan things out for sure, but also leave some variance in there because things are changing quickly. That's a really good one.
All right, you're up, Sam.
My next one, and it links to our last best and worst show where we covered best and worst rides at Epcot, and this is plan your meals around certain rides. Spencer,
Oh, yeah.
this is a favourite of ours. Some of the rides, some of our favourite ones, are going to throw you around a little bit. So if you're having a big meal before you go on Tower of Terror, before you go on Mission Space, before you go on Rock and Roller Coaster, these, maybe Slinky Dogs to a certain extent, these rides, they're going to throw you around a little bit. And I've made the mistake because you're in the theme park, there's a lot of good food, they're pumping out the smells of the popcorn, everything. Just be careful. Yeah, it can get you. We were talking about Mission Space last time, weren't you? That'll get you.
Yeah, I was literally about to say that. Don't eat anything before you ride Mission Space. All right, well, my last one, kind of already hit on it a little bit, is just don't overplan. I've learned I am someone who's very rigid, and I like to plan out all of my details, and it's done me a lot of good being a local because I haven't felt the need to squeeze everything in. But it also made me realize that even when I was coming in out of town, it would have done me a lot of good to also just not overplan. A lot of people stress out about their trips. They think they need to get in every single ride, especially if it's your first time. Here's the thing. You can always come back to Disney, and you can figure out ways to do it cheaper. So just keep that in mind. It's just going to be a much better experience if you can just come and be relaxed. Plan out your key heavy hitters that you want to hit. Be willing to, give them at least, an hour wait. Kind of plan around that. And then outside of that, just see what is open and what seems like a good wait time for you. Definitely plan your meals if you can. Sometimes one rule of thumb that I always used to do, I know some people like to plan out all 3 meals of their day. What I started shifting to, which I think is a much better experience, is just, reserve one meal. Plan just one meal. And then kind of go from there and try out new things. I think you'll have a much more interesting experience than you would have if everything was really rigid and you knew exactly what you were going to do and what you were going to get. You might try something new that you weren't even thinking about getting as far as food goes, and you might really enjoy it. But otherwise, I've seen a lot of people's trips get ruined because they weren't able to sneak everything in that they really wanted to sneak in. It's much better to just go and be a little bit more relaxed with it and just see how it kind of develops over time. Again, there are ways, even though Disney is very expensive, there are ways to come back at a much cheaper rate. So
I agree. And also, if you're not familiar with the parks, if you're new to some of the Disney parks, I would highly encourage you to look at some of the YouTube videos that talk about the history of the parks, because you're going to get a lot more out of it, especially Epcot. There's a ton of history there. Same with the Magic Kingdom, how things are planned out. So as you are walking around, instead of just going from, point A to point B, from ride to ride to ride, take in a lot of the surroundings, because there's a lot of history there with the parks, and I think it really adds a lot of colour to the vacation as well, and you'll understand why people like us are so passionate about the Disney parks. Well, you totally touched on my final one, which was plan where you want to eat.
Yep.
And this is multifaceted. One is that some restaurants are very hard to get reservations for. And what I'll say is, it's not always the good ones that are hard to get reservations for. That I would encourage you to research the restaurants that you're interested in. Some of them are definitely geared more towards the experience that you're having versus the food. So if you're somebody that's really into your food, there is some of the best restaurants in Florida are in Disney World. Some of the best chefs are here. I would do your research. Some of it can be hit or miss. I always think of Epcot having a very high standard of food. I would encourage you to go to the Beer Garden, even the Rose and Crown in England. But it does certain things not well. Like, for example, the Mexican restaurant that they have there that has the Mexican cuisine, the San Angelo Inn, is not good Mexican food at all, if you've ever had Mexican food. So plan out the meals, because you're going to want to get some restaurants. And again, look at the resorts as well, to your earlier point. There's some great resort restaurants. In fact, I'd argue that probably some of the best restaurants in Disney World Resort are great. Sinar is great at Animal Kingdom Lodge. There's some great food, but it does take some planning, not only because you want to get the type of food that you're interested in or try something new. Reservations can be difficult, but also some of the restaurants that you think might be good not necessarily are the good ones. There's definitely a lot of hidden gems, which is part of the fun of coming here, I guess.
Yeah, with that being said, I don't think I've ever gotten I've always wanted to, but I've never gotten a reservation to Sci-Fi Diner to this date. It's an extremely I think it might be one of the harder reservations to get. I have tried so many times and I never get a reservation.
Yeah, that's another point, isn't it? The food is, by all accounts, quite average, but it's extremely hard because of the experience to get in there. Whereas we often see reservations for restaurants at the Polynesian, and also if you go into Epcot, the Beer Garden is a great, the German, in the Germany pavilion, restaurant food is great there. We eat plant-based, we eat vegan. They do a full vegan menu there. The Rose and Crown is got some decent British food there, and I think we've never been to it, but the Chefs de France is supposed to be one of the best restaurants in the whole of the Disney World.
Yeah, and to another point, one of my favorite restaurants too, you don't really even need a major reservation to get in there, which is Yak and Yeti.
Yeah, and same with if you're looking for some interesting drinks, Olga's Cantina at Hollywood Studios. Apparently the food's pretty average, but the drinks are very cool. And we went last Sunday, didn't we? And
Yeah.
I've been before where apparently it's very hard to get a reservation, but if you turn up there, they'll usually slot you in.
Yeah, I think we were in like 15 minutes, right? 10, 15 minutes, and it was busy.
Well, there were our 10 tips if you're visiting Disney World in 2022. Let us know in the comments section down below if you've got any tips for new travelers. And we'll see you next time on Relatively Credible.